Hey everyone, this is Pause or Repeat. Here we figure out whether a game is really worth your time and money. Today's game is Metaphor ReFantazio. This is Atlus's latest anime-style video game that definitely takes a lot of inspiration from their previous Persona games while being a new IP altogether. It was nominated in multiple categories for the Game Awards, including Game of the Year. So let's find out what made it so great despite not winning by taking a look at the gameplay. The gameplay of Metaphor ReFantazio pulls systems used in other Atlus RPGs, especially Persona. It's a hybrid mix of real-time combat and turn-based, but the focus is on the turn-based combat. The real-time combat is used in the overworld and allows your party to potentially get a jump on enemies by hitting them first, or take them out completely without having to initiate turn-based combat. In turn-based combat, you control the protagonist as well as his companions, as you would in any other turn-based game. The abilities each character has will depend on which archetype you have enabled for them, of which there are 46 to unlock, starting with 3 given by default. They range from warrior to mage to gunner and much more, and are unlocked by creating a bond between the protagonist and characters in the story. Speaking of the story, let's dive into that. The story follows the protagonist in a fictional fantasy world. Centered around the United Kingdom of Uchronia, tension is high after the assassination of the king and monsters running rampant. This is on top of the many tribes or races of the world holding prejudice and discrimination towards each other. With the king dead, the prince is the birthright to the throne, but he is cursed to slumber and eventually die. It is up to the protagonist, part of the resistance protecting the prince, to return order to the throne by setting out on a quest to awaken the prince. But now the question still stands. Pause or repeat? You know, for once, we're not playing as teenagers in an Atlus game, which is something that a lot of people are definitely happy about, because this has an entirely different feel, and I'm sure even the Atlus developers are happy that for once they can do something different than Persona.
Yeah. That's very true, man. I mean, from the minds that gave us Persona 3, 4, and 5 comes Metaphor ReFantazio, a fantasy RPG where you and your fairy sidekick, Gallica, set out to uncurse a lost prince. So, like, just as HenricK was referencing, think of it as Persona with fewer high school crushes and more magical politics. Whether, you know, a lot of the DEI people might be going, oh, no! I mean, it's really not that bad. It's not nothing of that kind of nature. You're not getting none of that, like, the Veil Guard, per se, the Bond.
Yeah, it's not to that extent.
Nothing of that. I mean, it's no different than when you're watching, you know, your fantasy sci-fis like the world of Star Wars, right? You're always going to get a little sense of politics. How do you create Skyrim without a little bit of, you know, political conflict, right? So, like, that's what this game aims for.
I mean, the story does revolve around an election, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not so much like in your face of like, oh, you know, we're gonna have to sit down and have a whole Congress meeting, right? It's not like that.
Yeah, no, not
this
at all.
kind of game.
No, I mean, the game delivers solid RPG mechanics and an impressive new world. And I think it's important to remember, too, while it boasts about strong gameplay and Atlus signature storytelling, can we just get right to it, HenricK? I mean, let's be real. This is a $70 game with 2010 graphics. I mean, didn't this remind you it should have been something that could have worked really well on the PS3? I mean, sometimes I felt like I was playing a fancy mobile game.
Chris, you do realize that animation like they have in this costs a lot of money. It's not like they skimped out on the art style.
Yeah, it just felt like, for me at least, like, I get it. It's definitely about the art direction, but if it were about the graphical fidelity, I would be filing a missing person report. You know what I mean? Because, like, Metaphor ReFantazio feels like it wandered out of class and skipped out on every lecture on bold choices and handed in a project labeled high school diorama. That's how I felt.
This is also for our viewers from the person who's like, you know, games like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, I don't like their art style. You're always like this, Chris, all right?
Okay, fair. And that is definitely the vocal tone that I have brought out over the last year. But it's just, it just feels like this kind of style game could have worked on an indie kind of style budget for the consumer. That's kind of where I'm going at. It's like, I just felt like, where do they justify the $70 mark? Just because of the success of the Persona series that we all have to, like, give it? I feel like that was a little bit of a gripe, but you know, let's go back to the gameplay. You know, because that was just like one little tiny anecdote.
A lot of worth in the game. You know, even if you're gonna say, yeah, the art style doesn't seem like it's worth it, the worth of the game really is in the story and the characters, because
Yeah,
the
but did
characters are written really well,
okay, the
and so is
characters
the
are cool.
story.
Okay, the characters are cool. Don't get me wrong. The story is nice, but did you really like grinding out over and over and over again? I felt like that was the game's unofficial tagline, because the bosses hit harder than an ex's text at 2 a.m. If you know what I mean, gamers out there. I mean, figuring out how much grinding is enough trial and error circus that I was already almost about to tap out, because it felt like you just had to constantly go into these repetitive dungeons and bounties, and they felt like they were like reheated leftovers. And I'm like, yeah, they technically work, but I wasn't like too thrilled about having to do that, because you really can't progress in this story without having to go down these dungeons and bounty routes. But
Well,
what do you have to say about
that's
stuff like
that's
that?
kind of the expected experience from a JRPG. I mean, that's how it's been ever since the genre was
Fair enough, yeah.
initiated. You go into this game expecting some level of grinding at some point, whether that means, depending on the game, it might actually mean going out and just, trying to get into random encounters. But this game actually does a pretty good job of preventing you from having to go do that, as long as you're keeping up with your side quests and, exploring enough at least, then you're going to be around the right level for doing any of the main story missions that you're supposed to be doing. So you really just have to keep your eyes open for the side missions, which, granted, I get it. Not everyone wants to do side missions when the main storyline quest is right there in their quest log and they can go do it right away. But the game really doesn't want you to go do that, because
Yeah.
that's going to
Well,
be
that's how
where
I
you then
felt. I
find
was
yourself
getting, and so
grinding.
like that's why it felt so tasking, HenricK. And then like I will say too. I mean, it was a good spinoff with the familiar Persona mechanics, but instead of like personas, you're dealing with archetypes, which kind of feels
Yep.
like the same dish with a new garnish, if you know what I mean. But like you were hinting at it. I think we can both agree. The story is what's gonna sell it for gamers. While touching at times, it has more of an unnecessary twist than a soap opera. And I mean, Rella, seriously, you know what I mean? But like some plot decisions that just toss the central premise out the window. And I'm looking at you, Lewis. So for some people, they might feel like this is a unique journey, blending in the novel ideas with familiar gameplay that we all love from Persona. But like, I don't know, HenricK, I just kind of felt like it was a pause. Like it reminds us of the power of stories to inspire hope, but with its outdated design. And to me, it kind of felt like it fumbled a bit in execution. It's more of a one-time read than a timeless classic. But I can definitely see Atlas, wanting to revisit it. I mean, there's clearly a large fan base that is embracing the new direction, going into this like fairy tale kind of a route. But I'm curious on how you feel about this. Do you feel like this will be a timeless classic?
Yeah, I am a fan of JRPGs, and I do feel like this game has a place in people's libraries if they're a fan of the genre. It's just you really have to be a fan of the genre, especially when this game has its first several hours feel kind of slow compared to the rest of the game, because it really does take a few hours for you to get to the point where, okay, now the world is open for me to actually do things like I would expect from this genre of game. At the same time, that's very typical for this genre of JRPG. It's not a standout in terms of anything like that, but that is a little disappointing considering it is a new IP. They could have definitely done something different. And I am interested to see what happens with a sequel, because they are interested in doing one, or at least a spin off title inside this universe. So that would be interesting to see. But when it comes to this one, yeah,
Come
I'd
on,
say
HenrikK.
it's a bit
Come
of a
on.
pause for
Just
me,
say. I was like,
unfortunately, just because
you danced around that answer
it's
so
it's
much,
not
man.
something
Like,
that I'm like
I
eager
get it. We
to
all like
revisit anytime
JRPGs.
soon,
Right. Come on.
unfortunately.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, it's fun. It's cool. When it goes on sale a little bit, that's when I would jump on it. I think that the
Yeah.
$70 price tag is so outrageous. It's just the fact that you are a celebrated, developer or publisher. Like, for the love of gamers, please, if you want us to embrace your new story IP, you gotta work with us a little bit in a sense. But then again, I could be so ass backwards, and that's why we love hearing from you, the gamers. So please join along for the conversation. What is your verdict? Do you feel like this is a pause to play something else, or do you think this is a repeat? Like, are you
Yeah,
really
let us
excited for the
know.
future?
because, this game did get nominated for Game of the Year. Clearly, people like it, and I liked it too, just not enough to want to play through the
Or
first
was it
several
one of
hours
those,
again.
the conspiracy theories all over again? Was that another one of those questionable nominations?
That is
that
a thing
probably
a lot of
shouldn't
people
have been
think
there.
about, but
Yeah.
maybe not for this one, Chris.
Yeah, probably not. Okay.